Fork Island. But I was on an island in a casino, just had a win with only like an hour or two since my last bet. And I was like, well, I could just gamble the amount that I won. And if I lose, then it's like nothing ever happened anyway. That thought led to a 12-hour gambling binge in that casino, where I put myself into debt for the next 6 months.
Hello, everybody. My name's Daniel, and welcome to a very special episode of Addicted Recovery. Today, we're doing our podcast episode. We've got Rob on the channel here. He's also got a YouTube channel himself, the One Day at a Time Gambling Awareness. Tell us a little bit about yourself, Rob. How old are you? Where are you from? What do you like to do in your free time?
Yeah. Hey, Daniel, thanks for having me on. So I'm 26 years old. I'm from the United States. Right now, I'm living in Philadelphia. In my free time, I end up making videos about gambling addiction, similar to yourself. I've been in recovery since November the 12th of 2022.
Great to have you on. I really appreciate you getting on with the time difference. You being in America, me being in Australia. The middle of the night for myself and stupid o'clock in the morning for you. So I do really appreciate you making the time for us.
It is what it is, but I'm happy to be here. I'm thinking this is going to be a good episode. I actually spent some time over in Australia, so I know that with that time difference, I wasn't talking to any of my friends or family because anytime they were awake, I was going to sleep. So I know the feeling.
Yeah, it's tough. It's tough. Right, take me back to the beginning. Where did your gambling start off?
Yeah. So in the United States, the legal age to gamble is 21, but daily fantasy sports, lottery, and certain types of, like, they call them social casinos, which is basically just sports books at this point. They're legal to 18-year-olds based on the way that the law classifies them. Growing up near Philadelphia, we are a very big sports city. There's not much else going on in the city, so it's like we kind of cling to that. So anytime that I was with friends or family, we would be watching a game. It would be a Wednesday night, meeting up with friends. We'd meet up at 7 because that's when the Phillies game would start. That's their baseball team. And if it was a Sunday afternoon and the Eagles game was about to kick off, that's when a family event might be centered around sports constantly. So when we found out about daily fantasy sports, when my friends and I were 18, through a commercial on TV, we're like, that's awesome. We get to make money while gambling on the sport like that we're already watching. Like that's too good to be true. And it was. But it started with me placing some smaller contests on teams that we loved. It was the Phillies, it was the Sixers, our basketball team, and it was the Eagles. And then maybe like 2 or 3 weeks later, my friends and I were still doing our 7 o'clock contests, but that wasn't enough for me anymore. It was enough for them. They'd go to sleep and get up for school the next day. But I'd find myself betting either more contests later into the night or starting to do sports betting with a website called Bovada, which is a casino license in Latvia. And it's kind of like a legal gray area in America as to whether or not people can use it. But yeah, it all started with wanting to just get more involved in the sports that I loved with my friends when I was 18, and very quickly turned into a compulsion like 2, 3 weeks later where I was betting on anything and everything that I could get my hands on.
Crazy how just a couple of weeks went by and it was straight into the compulsion.
Yeah.
How long was it until you sort of noticed things were getting out of hand, things were getting out of control, like sort of red flags and alarm bells started?
Sure. Now doing what I do professionally, I could tell you that it was like 3 weeks in. But during the time, I mean, it wasn't a problem. It was always a mistake. If there was a big loss, it just meant you picked the wrong thing. You didn't think about it long enough. You were too impulsive with that bet, but not the rest of them. You're usually fine, was kind of the end answer that I would reach. So I think the first time that things like truly reached a point where I had to take a step back and actually kind of think, is this a problem? Was about a year after I started. So we actually just wrapped up the March Madness tournament here in America, which for those that don't know is the college basketball tournament. So it's the top, what is it, 16 by 4, 64 teams in the country go up against each other in a single elimination tournament, and the winner is the top college basketball school, whatever. Well, throughout the history of that tournament that's been going on for decades, if not almost like a century, never up until that point in 2018 had a 16 seed beaten a 1 seed in the tournament. Never. Always it's like a powerhouse school matched up with a school that barely squeaked their way in, like they were just on the edge of being in that top 64. Well, that year, Virginia was matched up against University of Maryland, Baltimore County, Virginia being the 1 seed and the latter being the 16th seed. And for the first time in tournament history, March 2018, 16 seed beat the 1 seed. And as a gambling addict already at the time, I would say, I'd become a gambling addict. I think one of the worst things for me wasn't when I would lose a bet, but it would be when I wouldn't make a bet that had a big payout and then told myself that it was obvious. Like, dude, you should have known that they were going to beat Virginia. Virginia stinks. Even though that's never happened before, you should have known. And my natural reaction was to FOMO into the next game. So I took UMBC to beat Kansas State, which was now the 9 seed versus the 16 seed. And Kansas State ended up winning. But the problem was that I had put basically more money than I was able to cover with a bookie now at this time onto the game. And so, noting the system of how you would pay a bookie, I don't know if you even have bookies in Australia because of how young you can actually gamble legally. But in America, at least, the way that you pay a bookie is like on a weekly scale. And so you accumulate wins and losses from Sunday to Sunday. On Monday, you would pay out or whatever dates he decides to go with. And so I had one more day. And I had in my head, I thought, I have to make this money back. I can't afford to pay it. So my solution wasn't to get a loan. My solution was to take more credit out with him and put it on a exhibition spring training baseball game between the Yankees and I think it was the Nationals. And so for spring training baseball, that's like the warm up games before our seasons start. And I thought, well, these guys are probably not even going to make the team. Like, there's no way they're going to hit that well. Let's take the under. They're not going to score enough runs. I think the under was like 8 or 9 runs, something like that, maybe 8.5. And I think by the end of the game, there was about 24 runs scored. So it was an absolute blast of the under, and it went way over. Now, you know, it sucks that it was the way that it was, and it sounds awful that it was an exhibition baseball game. But in reality, at this point, it didn't matter what the game was. It just mattered that I was continuing to chase, and I was in desperation mode. And it was honestly a very exciting experience until it wasn't. That was the first time in March of 2018, late March, that I had to tell my family that I made a mistake. And the reason that I told them was because I couldn't afford to pay the guy. So I needed help. I needed a bailout. And that was really the only reason that I told them in that situation. But I'd say that was the first time that I even had a semblance of a thought that these are too many mistakes strung together in a row to just be called bad luck. This is something different. I didn't put the word addiction on it at the time, but I said, this is something that I need to slow down. And so for a couple months, I slowed it down a little bit, paid off the debt that I'd built up to my family because to their credit, they bailed me out a lot and they, in retrospect, shouldn't have it continued the addiction, but they didn't know that. But to their credit, or to my credit rather, I paid them back every time. So every time I'd find myself in debt from gambling, I'd kind of lock in, work 2 different jobs, and end up paying it back, and it really sucked, I'll tell you that. It didn't teach me any lesson, it just kind of slowed me down for the time being, because I never thought, "This is an addiction." I thought, "You gotta slow this down, you gotta change what you're doing. Not stop, but change." And so, yeah, I think that's right around the first time that I recognized it as possibly an issue.
I was laughing along with you there where you've said the 16th seed beat the first seed, and I should have known. I should have been on that. Completely relate to that. It's almost worse than a loss, isn't it? When you see something go by that you should have been on. Well, when you're in addiction, it feels that way. The bookie system, I'm not too familiar with myself. Spent most of my life in England and the last 10 years in Australia, and I've always lost my money to sort of an establishment online where you make a deposit and then you sort of lose it there. And then so the bookie thing, is that like the legal way of doing it in America, or is that sort of a, well, oh, it's
The opposite, yes. But for a long time, that's how it was done. Until 2018 in the United States, you couldn't make sports bets legally outside of Nevada or in a sports book physically in New Jersey. So it's very new that we have legalized online gambling. It's all really been in the last 7 years. So this bookie system of how it was for decades before, and it used to be run, mainly by the mob, which is why people would say that the mob has ties to Atlantic City because for a really long time, gambling went through the shadier side of things in America.
So once you couldn't pay that money back, I imagine there's a hell of a lot of fear there due to the fact that it's not a reputable establishment, if you like. It's something that could potentially cause you physical harm.
I think that there was definitely an increased urgency to pay it back. But what I will say is, you know, the guy that I was dealing with was not the Al Capone type from the movies that you would see. He was more a guy that you would bump into at a frat party, maybe. So I don't think that physical danger was necessarily there, but there was going to be a lot of follow up, a lot of badgering, a lot of, making sure that it got paid out and just continuous follow up until it was done. So it would have become a very annoying situation for sure.
Yeah. Your from the sounds of it, all your betting was online. Your family didn't notice until you told them about it, until you had to come clean. And then you say you slowed down a bit, but you were still sort of at it in the background. Did your family notice? Were your family asking questions at this point, like as the addiction continued in the background? Were your family sort of knowing what's going on, or were you just completely living that secretive life that we all live?
I think at first, like the first and maybe even the second time that I found myself in debt from gambling to the point, to like a significant point where I was working jobs to pay it off. I don't think that they ever stopped and thought he's addicted to gambling because of the way that I explained things. I think rather the thought that came to their mind was he made a mistake because there's plenty of other times that I actually did make a mistake, like, you know, in high school, going to prom and walking down the street with a beer can and, getting chased by the cops because I was drinking. Oh, God forbid. That's a mistake. Then, getting caught with a joint in my hotel or in my college dorm room when I was 19, that's a mistake, right? That's one-off problems. The gambling was they saw it the same way because I had made plenty of behavioral issue type mistakes. But the gambling was different because it was continuous. Like when I got caught with the beer can, right? I didn't walk around the street anymore with a beer can as an 18-year-old. When I got caught with the joint, I stopped going in the dorm room with weed. But when I got caught with the gambling, I kept going, I just didn't tell anyone about it, and that was the difference between it, I think. So, they didn't see it as a problem, they saw it as a one-off mistake, maybe a two-off mistake, and then by the time, 3, 4, 5 comes around, that's when there really starts to be, like, a breaking of trust, a feeling like I've been lying to them, which I was, feeling like they're being manipulated, which they were, that I always needed money and it was always for something else, but it was actually for gambling, which was the truth. And, honestly, when I look back, it's kind of a blur between times 1 and 5 of going into debt from gambling. It was just up and down the same pattern of behavior over and over again. And then I decided I needed to change. I was 20 years old and I said, I need to change something. But I didn't think I needed to stop gambling. What I thought was, I don't like where I live. I don't like what I'm doing at school. I need to change the direction of my life. Let me do a semester abroad. That'll fix it. That'll let me reset my life. I'll change everything. So I looked at the map of places that I could go where I didn't need to speak a second language because I don't know one, and it would just be for 1 semester. And I had Ireland, England, cold, cold, rainy, and Sydney, Australia. Those were the 3 options at the time. And so I picked Sydney, Australia, not knowing that Australia has the highest rate of gambling losses per capita in the world by about double the next country. So, that ended up being a terrible decision for me. But I did fly to Sydney in, I guess that would have been 2020. Yeah, January 2020.
I can relate to the cold of England. Definitely, that's the bit I was nodding along with then. Whilst you were in Sydney, was it always online up until this point? But once you got to Sydney, did it then become physical? And speaking from experience, I know what Sydney's like. There's mini casinos inside every single pub. The Star Casino is a massive attraction. It's everywhere in Sydney. It's in your face everywhere. I was similar to you. I didn't know what I was walking into when I got over here and when I arrived here 10 years ago. Yours was strictly online up until that point. Did it change once you got to Sydney?
There were like small experiences up until this point that weren't online. So I remember going to a casino in the Bahamas when I was 18. I remember playing poker with friends in person. So there were some in-person experiences, but the vast majority, 99%, were online up until this point. Because I legally couldn't do it online. It barely existed as online sports betting at this point in 2021, um, or 2020, excuse me. But yeah, I landed in Sydney after flying from New York, and it was 5.5 hours to San Francisco, and then it was like 12 hours or 14 hours or whatever it was from San Francisco to Sydney. And there was a big layover in between, so it took me about 22, 23 hours to get to, Sydney, and I can't really sleep on planes, and so I basically stayed up for 24 hours straight and landed, but the first thing I did when I landed, after I dropped my bags, wasn't to, like, go and talk to the other students that were gonna be staying in the same room as me or in the same area as me. It was that I dropped my bags and I went straight to the Star Casino, because when I began looking things up to do in Sydney, I saw beaches, I saw, go to the zoo and hold a koala, then I saw that there's a casino, and then I saw that I could play there because it was 18 to gamble, and as soon as I saw that, it was like I locked in, and that was exactly what I wanted to do when I landed, and it's what I did for, the 3 months that we were there. But what was particularly bad about the design in Australia, at least in my opinion, in Sydney specifically, was this was right on the cusp of the one punch laws. So your audience will know, like, contextually what that is, right? Do you remember what that was?
King's Cross.
Yeah. When, like, there was like this span of time where people were like getting super belligerently drunk and then punching someone, and there was a bunch of deaths from like random punching. Like, it was so Australian. I've never heard of anything like that in my life.
A startling statistic that over 80% of the people who watch my content are not yet subscribed to my channel. If you like what we do here at Addicted Recovery, then the simple and free way to support us is to hit that subscribe button. It helps the channel grow, and you personally will be helping spread the message, spread an awareness of gambling addiction. You may just help that one person hear what they need to.
But I uh I think that the worst aspect of that was kind of the loopholes that were built into it. And so what the law was, for anyone that doesn't contextually know, was basically at, I believe it was 2 a.m., maybe it was 1 a.m., depending on the night, all bars had to shut and they couldn't go all night as they had been before. And so when the bars shut, they basically told everyone to get out, and all of the drunkest people in Sydney now had a decision. They could either go home, or they could go to the one place that was allowed to continue to serve alcohol 24/7 because they had an exemption from the government. And the one place that was allowed to do that was the Star Casino in Sydney. And so, I was gonna be there anyway because I was a gambling addict and I was looking to get to the casino at the end of the night regardless. But you would see this mass migration of young men and women, but mainly, in my memory, young men, maybe 18 to 24 years old, walking down the streets in the CBD heading towards the Star Casino. And it would all happen at once at 2 a.m. or 1 a.m., whatever the time was that given night, where all the bars would close at the same time. It was just an incredible sight to see, like, so many people jammed into a casino because they wanted to keep drinking, but the natural byproduct of that was those were probably the most profitable times of the day or night for the casino. So, roundabout ways of answering your question, that used to be online, now it was in person. It did change, but just the environment there of, like, waking up and knowing that that's when American sports were going to start, it really changed everything about the way I designed my day. I mean, there were plenty of times I missed class because there was a basketball game on in the US, and I wanted to bet on it. So I'd go to a TAB in one of the pubs, and I would just put all the money that I had on this game. So I was basically living paycheck to paycheck without even having a paycheck. I was using a mixture of student loan disbursement and money that I was borrowing off my mom to keep gambling, basically. And I had made a bank account there because they told us that we had to. And we put some seed money in there, and I think it was gone after like 48 hours, replenished, and then gone for the rest of the 3 months, just back and forth.
Completely understand the excitement that you would have felt not being able to go to casinos back in America, and then as soon as you've landed here, you're legal. I remember when I turned 18, instantly was in the casino that day with 3 credit cards in my back pocket. Tell me about the different. Tell me about the feelings that were going on when you were when you were getting when you were getting wins. You were only there 3 months, so I imagine there wasn't very many. But if there was wins while you were there, if there was big wins, what were the losses like when it was actually in person? You could see the cash sort of disappear.
I mean, the wins and losses, they would just progressively get worse throughout the entire addiction. So when I always tell stories, I always think about like what was happening the last couple of months that I was gambling. But it's nice to reflect back on this because I don't talk about it all that much because most of my audience isn't from Australia. But I can remember winning. There were wins, and a lot of times the wins came at the casino. I rarely remember winning on TAB bets, but when it would happen, it would usually just go to buy beers or stuff like that or put more bets in. But I can remember sitting on this is what I remember really clearly. The Coogee Beach, is that what it's called? The Yeah, Coogee. I remember sitting on the beach after I just came out of a bar right across the street from the beach, and I had placed a bet on like ITF tennis or something stupid. And I was just sitting on my phone on the beach, like nice water, nice beach, great day, lots of people around. And I'm just sitting there like this, swiping and refreshing the score of the tennis match. That was fun in the bar. Like I was like, no, I need to experience Australia. So I'm gonna leave the bar and I'm gonna go outside and really enjoy the beach. And then I was just swiping the phone anyway. It was just constant. But I remember like kind of the losses. There was one day where I had been to the casino 3 or 4 days in a row, and I was playing craps, and the craps dealer was a guy pretty close to my age, I think, and he was like, "Dude, you've been here a couple days in a row, like, what do you do for work?" And I was like, "Oh, I don't, like, I'm a student." And he said, "Get the fuck out of here." And I was like, no." I was like, "No." He's like, "You're gonna lose all your money, you need to leave." And I was like, "Oh, no, it's okay, dude, like, you don't get it, I got this." And, like, I kept rolling until I lost all my money, and he was like, "Dude, I told you, like, please don't come back." And then I saw him again the next day. It was just, like that kind of feeling. That was actually probably the only time any gambling professional, like a casino staff employee of the gambling industry, ever said anything to me about my gambling other than, "Come back tomorrow." So I remember the ups and downs, but what I really remember is just like being completely distracted and just not focused on what was supposed to be the trip that was going to reset my life. And it just turned into a 3 month void of not talking to anyone and just continuing to gamble.
Had that written down as a question to ask you later. Did anybody else notice before you did? I wasn't expecting your answer to be the craps dealer at the Star Casino.
That was it. He was a young guy.
You
He
said
was 25, and I was probably like 20. I was 21 now at the time.
it started out as fun as it does for everybody at this point where we're up to in the story now. It's probably while you're in the addiction in the moment, it still seems like it's fun, but looking back, we can see that it's not fun. You're stuck in it. Was there a destination? Was there a finish line? That sort of from my experience, I always said once a few years had passed and I was this much indebted to gambling. Once I win this much, I'll stop. Once I get here, I'll stop. But I was never able to. Did you sort of have that attitude at this point? Are you seeing a way out of gambling, or are you just still sort of, oh, it's fun. I just do it on the side. I can continue to.
I think I would form that mindset a couple years later. So it's important to kind of note what happened following Australia. So the reason that I was only there for 3 months instead of 6 or 7 months was that COVID hit. And when COVID hit, they told all international students basically from every country, go home. and so they shipped everyone back home. But now I landed in America as a 21-year-old, now not allowed to leave the house. And in America, there was a bit of a loophole system that millions of people took advantage of during COVID, which was the unemployment system. It's standard system usually where, you put in your claim and whatever job you were working before, you get covered a certain percentage of that while you're looking for new employment. Along the lines of the normal one, you're supposed to be actively looking for jobs. You have to send them like proof that you're looking for jobs, XYZ. During COVID, I qualified for like $11 of unemployment, but the government passed a program to try to help, and this did help, families that needed it, but millions of people didn't need this. They passed a $600 stimulus on every unemployment check. And so now I was living at home with my family. I had no expenses. I had a gambling addiction. I was 21 and I had $11 of unemployment that turned into $611 of unemployment every single week. So, we're not talking about millions of dollars, but we're talking about just lumps of disposable income that fed my ability to play poker online. And for 3, 4, 5 months, whatever it was until Korean baseball came back, that's all I did was poker and casino. Then Korean baseball came back and I started doing sports betting and it was all just a big blur because from 21 to 22, we didn't leave the house. Years old, excuse me, maybe not the year. When I was 21 until I was 22, I didn't leave the house. I was just gambling, drinking, like eating, getting fat, um, putting all the money that I had into that. And then all of a sudden they said, okay, you can go outside again. And I was like, nah, nah, I'll just stay inside and continue to gamble. And so my senior year of college, I lived with a couple guys, but now I'm back in Washington instead of New Jersey, where my family was living. We gambled all day, every day. And I think maybe one of the other guys probably had a gambling problem, but I don't know if he ever, confronted it because we don't talk anymore. Because over the course of that year, we would have our relationships with one another deteriorate through yelling at each other, stress, anger, usually surrounding gambling or a girl, but mostly gambling. But I just felt like it was continuing to ramp up at this time. The amounts began to get a little bit bigger. This was also you're a crypto guy, as you mentioned, so this was during, like, a lot of the crypto airdrops, where, for those that don't know what that is, essentially, companies that were releasing new cryptocurrencies would give you governance currency on their platform, basically to reward you for being a loyal or early customer. They wanted to give you an incentive to use the platforms more. So they were giving out tens of thousands of dollars of free cryptocurrency, which I never held on to. That just meant I could gamble it the next day on whatever sports were on. Similar to yourself, we'd probably both be crypto millionaires right now if gambling didn't exist. But who knows? I mean, most people call crypto gambling anyway. But yeah, I've lost track of the original questions, so you'll have to forgive me. But this was about my life, the years after COVID. So now I'm about 22, 23 years old.
This is like 5 or 6 years now since you took that you made that very first bet. At any point across this stint, have you tried to stop? Have you confronted the fact that this is a problem, I need to do something about it? Have you tried to stop and relapsed and fell back into it or anything at this point? Or is it still just sort of plodding along, ignoring the red flags and the alarm bells?
I wouldn't say that I ignored the red flags. There was plenty of times where I was like, I can't believe I just did that. I'm crying. I'm depressed. I'm, needing to borrow money for bailouts, that kind of thing. But it still wasn't to the point where I said it was a gambling addiction. It was still to the point where it was mistakes that I shouldn't have been making. It was dumb decisions, it was bad bets, it was impulsive bets. It wasn't a gambling addiction, it was mistakes over and over again. And I don't think that I thought it was a gambling addiction until February 8th, or I guess it would have been February 4th or 5th of 2022. So essentially, the gambling led me to a breakup with the girl that I was dating throughout college. For better or for worse, we're gonna call it for better. But it did lead to a breakup, and then the it was kind of like a weird chain of events that led to this. So the girl that I was dating in college was from Athens in Greece, and so I had had a flight booked for after graduation to go and visit her family, and, we broke up, so I had a flight that I couldn't get refunded. I told a friend, like, "Do you wanna go?" We could change it, we couldn't refund it, we could change it to a different place, so we went to Rome, and we ended up having, like, the best vacation ever. We made a lot of friends while we were there, and one girl that I wanted to meet up with was Romanian, and so I came back home after that Rome trip. I had a big gambling win on a big sports bet, and I always told myself, "You're gambling so that you can do whatever you want, travel the world, not have to work a normal job. Like, use this money and go and visit her. Let's go meet up in Paris. Like, why not?" And so I was like, "Yeah, like, that's great. I'm the man. This is gonna be awesome." And, I fly to Paris, and I meet her there. And about 2 hours after we arrive, I'm in the hotel room bathroom, and I pull my phone out, and she's taking, like, a phone call, and I compulsively just start spinning slots on my phone, and I spin away all of the budget that I had for the remainder of that trip, and that was the first time that I asked myself, "Why did you just do that?" Because there were plenty of times where I asked myself, "Well, why'd you just do that?" And I had an answer, and I was like, "Oh, because you thought that this guy would win, last time you bet him, he won, or this was a great matchup, it was just bad luck." There was always that. I'm sitting there in the bathroom in Paris, and I have no money left for this trip that's gonna last another week. And I'm like, "I don't know why I just did that. There was no reason for me to do that." And I ended up calling a friend. The friend ended up giving me more money that would, cover me for the rest of the trip, and I had to pay him back, but that was the first time that I even conceptualized that this could be an addiction. And I was seeing a therapist throughout all this time, and I was like, "Dude, I'm gambling too much." Like, that was coming up a lot, but he thought I was depressed. He thought I had anxiety or something like that. I mean, Daniel, I was depressed because I was broke, and I was anxious because my bets were up while I was in the session with him, and I didn't know how they were doing. So, we didn't properly diagnose the problem in the right order, I think. There was depression, there was anxiety, but it was being stemmed from what I was doing to myself. And when I came back from that trip in Paris, I finally went to a Gamblers Anonymous meeting by his recommendation. And that was the first time that I properly said, "Shit, it's very obvious now that I'm a gambling addict." After we went through the 20 questions and I answered yes to all 20.
That was going to be my question. How many yeses did you have for the 20 questions? What are your family sort of thinking at this point? Just before the Gamblers Anonymous, where you said you were sort of in therapy anyway, but it wasn't for the gambling addiction. You weren't admitting to the gambling addiction at this point. What are your family thinking? Your family sort of trying to push you in this direction? Do they know the extent of the damage that you're doing? Like
Well,
what's 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 the impact it's having on your relationships, the gambling at this point?
I know for certain they had no idea what Gamblers Anonymous was, nor do most people, honestly. I don't know if it's the same in Australia, but I'd say most people don't know what that is. So they were definitely wanting me to stop gambling. I don't know if they even internalized that I was addicted to gambling by this point either, but they knew I was making a lot of bad decisions. Did it strain relationships? Yes. It never was, "You're out. I'm not giving you any money. I'm not trusting you anymore." It was more, excuse me, let me backtrack. It was never, "I'm not, kicking you out of the house and never seeing you again." It was more, "We're not gonna give you any more money. We don't really trust you with it," kind of thing. And so that is something that I had to live with, but once I started going to those meetings, I actually strung together about 9 months of time away from gambling. Relationships were rebuilding and life was going decently normal, I would say. The problem was, for me, I felt like a ticking time bomb. And I felt like I didn't have anything in my life that I cared about because I was counting the number of days since I did the thing that I loved to do. That was my only semblance of progress. And I mean, do you want me to dive right into the story of when I actually made my last bet?
Yes,
Was
please keep going.
So it was 9 months after I had first entered Gamblers Anonymous, and it was November the 12th of 2022. And up until that point, I was fighting urges, especially that last week before I did it, of like, "Yeah, you should make a little bet." I'm like, "No, no, I'm a gambling addict. I shouldn't make this bet." "But you're bored. You're not doing anything anyway. Your money's back. Like, it's not that big of a deal if you just make a bet." And so, I worked through that back and forth in my head until finally I said, "Screw it. I'm just going to make it one bet." And the morning of November the 12th, I made a sports bet and it won. But in certain books here, certain sports books here, and I would imagine it's not the case in Australia, but it could be if someone uses like a stake or like a roulette over there. This was a US based casino in Pennsylvania, but I tried to withdraw it right away because I felt guilty having placed the sports bet. I said, you know what, that was a mistake. I want to take this money out. I want to close this account. I want to self exclude and get back to a meeting. So I go to make the withdrawal, and they tell me there's a 24-hour hold period on the amount for whatever reason. They didn't actually ever give a reason now that I think about it. And I was like, that's unacceptable. I'm going to go to the casino, to the cashier's desk, and I'm going to demand that they pay me out right there. That'll work. And I got in the car and I went there. I got in an Uber rather, and I went there. I got to the desk and I said, "Hey, I want to make this withdrawal. I want to close this account afterwards." And they were like, "Oh, well, it says you have to wait 24 hours." I was like, "What do you mean? I'm right here. I see that you have money in that drawer. Just pay me what's in the account." They're like, "Wow, we can't. It's against our policy." So I was like, "Ugh, whatever." The Uber was about a 35, 40-minute drive from where I was living. So now I was basically on an island in a casino, not a real island, a metaphorical island, but I was on an island in a casino. Just had a win with only like an hour or two since my last bet. And I was like, huh. Well, I could just gamble the amount that I won. And if I lose, then it's like nothing ever happened anyway. That thought led to a 12-hour gambling binge in that casino where I put myself into debt for the next 6 months, working basically like 70, 80-hour weeks. But the one beautiful thing that came out of that day is the thought that does keep me away from gambling now to still to this day. It was about 8 or 9 hours in, which sounds crazy, but as a gambling addict, maybe that's something people can relate to. It was like 8 or 9 hours into the session at this casino, and I had gone up and down, and I was right around like, minus 30% of what I had taken out. And I had it all in loose bills rolled up into a wad, and I had it in my pocket. And my phone was in the same pocket. And I went to the bathroom and I tried to reach in to take out my phone, for probably to check on a bet. I don't even remember why. But when I went to reach out for my phone, the dollars fell out of my pocket and onto the floor. And so I had more money than I've ever seen in my life on the bathroom floor. And I was scrambling around, like picking everything up. And I got everything finally, and I took a deep breath. And I was like, and I started laughing. And the reason that I was laughing is because I had this thought: the money that's in your hand right now, throw it back. Just throw it back on the ground. Because if you do that, then someone might pick it up. Someone might leave with that money and they might have a good day. But if you leave with that money, you're going to lose it back there. Whether it's the next bet, 10 bets, or 100 bets from now, you're going to eventually lose it because all wins are future losses. And that thought, it didn't stop me that night. I went back out and I lost the rest of that money as I had predicted in my head. But it's the thought of, like, you're better off throwing this money in the trash on the ground, letting it on fire, or throwing it into the wind than you are gambling it. It's gonna be the same result, except someone else will be happy, other than the casino owner. And so that thought still to this day, it's like anytime I have an inkling of, like, missing the risk reward cycle, missing the highs and lows, missing, like, the excitement that comes along with it, I remember the end output, that all wins are future losses, and that if I start gambling, it goes to 0 or worse.
I love that. I love that. All winnings are just future losses. I say something similar. Winnings are just ammunition to go back and gamble with again. There's one time I can remember I actually did something with my gambling winnings. Every other time it was just going straight back. We could have we could have finished that story just as you said. I had the genius idea to go to the casino and demand the money. We could have just finished that story there because I think everyone listening knew exactly where it was going, where that was going to end up. But that negative thought that you had, it's good that you've still got that to this day. I've got something similar for myself. I won't go into it now around crypto, and I sort of cling on to that, and that's kept me in my recovery. What sort of avenues have you gone down since you've started that recovery journey in November? What do you do to maintain your recovery, to maintain your sobriety?
This time around, there's 4 steps that I focused on to really kind of maintain it, and I'll start with, 2, 3, and 4, and I'll go back to 1 to finish. So The thing that I decided back then was really important was that, 1, I needed to self-exclude from the casinos. You couldn't have access to it easily or else I was going to gamble, particularly the online sports books, but it was really anywhere I'd ever played. I went ahead and did a self-exclusion for whatever the longest possible period they would allow. And for those that don't know, self-exclusion is a voluntary ban that you're placing on yourself from the casino or sports book. Unfortunately, in Sydney, I imagine that self-exclusions are difficult because of the fact that every single pub has a sports book in it. But that's one thing that particularly helped me given the state of gambling in America. The thing that I think made a really big difference that anyone could do is limiting your access to money. So when I was quitting back then, I was 24, but I told my mom, I was like, hey, I need help. And I needed her to manage my bank account, which felt embarrassing. It felt really annoying because I now had to ask my mom for things that were technically mine. But that was all in my head. Like in reality, it changed nothing about my day to day life. And it kept my money basically in a forced savings account. The force being my mom yelling at me as a 24-year-old if I was to go and try to gamble it. So, it felt bad at the time, but it really allowed me to accumulate enough money to pay down debts without really feeling that temptation to ruin myself. Going to support group meetings was the next step. Like therapy is great, especially if they're trained in gambling addiction recovery. But in America, at least, that's a pretty rare certification at this point. And so the value of going to a support group where people understand what you've been through is just invaluable. Like being able to go and share your story, hear what's going on with other people, and listen. Sometimes those meetings are good, sometimes they're not so good. But at the end of the day, it's really about the routine. Are you taking time to reflect on why you don't want to go back to gambling? And are you hearing why someone else wants to stay away from it as well? There's a lot of value in that, even if, not every speaker is world renowned, let's say. But the last thing that I wanted to bring up is the fourth step, which is usually the step I say first. But for the purposes of this podcast, I kept it. When I quit, again, I felt like I had nothing to do. I felt purposeless. I felt like I lacked anything of meaning. And what I eventually found was that someone close to my age stopped showing up to my group meetings. I gave him a call. I said, "Hey, man, like, what happened?" He had gone back, breakup, bad situation, stressors, sent him back to gambling to cope with it. Uh, and I said, "Listen, yeah, I don't know what the answers are at this time, particularly." I was like, "I have no idea what to tell you, but I know for a fact that's not it because I just did that a couple weeks ago. And now I'm clocking in for my second shift. You don't want to put yourself in the same situation that I put myself. Come back to a meeting." He came back to a meeting. And from then until now, there's been some ups and downs in his story, but I won't, divulge his own story, but he's doing well, is what I will say. And that made me feel good for the first time in a very long time. And so I thought, let me just record myself saying that same thing. I'll put it on YouTube and millions of people are going to watch it. It's going to be great. And I did, and then, like, 4 people or 5 people watched the video, and 2 of them were myself, 1 was my mom, 1 was my girlfriend, and so I was like, "Oh, that's stupid, forget it, like, I'm gonna leave it," and, I always give her credit on this. My girlfriend reached out about the video after it was posted, and she said, "Hey, I saw your video, it really sucked." And I was like, "Oh, thanks, like, love you too, that's great." She said, "No, no, no, but the idea is really cool. It just doesn't sound like you were trying to be too serious. You're not that serious of a guy. Why don't you make it more fun, put it on TikTok, and see if you can reach some younger people?" I was like, "TikTok? The app for kids that do dances to trends? Like, no way, that's stupid." But I did it. I recorded myself in the drive-through of a Dunkin' Donuts. I don't know if we have those in Sydney yet, but you should. They're absolutely fantastic. It's a, quick serve coffee stop, and I got in the drive-through of a Dunkin' Donuts. I recorded myself saying, "Roulette's not 50-50 because of those green spaces." Something really obvious, but apparently not that obvious. It ended up getting 1.2 or 1.3 million views after the first 48 hours, and I was like, "Oh my god, I love TikTok." And so I started posting 6 times a day, every day for 2 years. Now, the reason that I bring up this story is because I didn't have anything that felt like it gave me meaning until I had that conversation with him and I felt good about it. A lot of people that go to group meetings will say, giving back and telling your story to people who are going through it right now helps you in your own recovery and it gives you a sense of meaning and purpose in your story. I now have a situation Where if I were to have a relapse, I have to explain to like 220,000 people that I had a relapse. And I don't want to put myself in that situation. So it's this intense pressure and stress, which is where I thrive. I mean, I don't know if that's fair to say across the board for people with a gambling addiction, but for the most part, people that I talk to thrive in stressful environments because we're so used to being in it. And so this is like a good stress that I put on myself, but it's helped me to maintain my recovery by finding purpose, finding a way to turn my story into something that can help, that can be positive, and taking lessons from it for myself that are just continuously allowing me to improve my mindset.
Some absolute gems of wisdom there. I'm going to encourage the viewers to rewind a couple of minutes and just go through that again and take notes because so many amazing things there that a lot of them I do myself as well. Can relate to getting the 5 views and two of them being your mum. I can completely relate to that. My first video. You've mentioned it a couple of times. Tell me about the relationship with your mum whilst you were sort of coming to the end of your addiction, what it's been like since you've been in recovery. I know my mum, I put my mum through 20 years of hell whilst in addiction. And now she's my biggest fan in recovery. So what's your relationship like with your mum before and after?
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's changed. I think that in the interim, when I was actively gambling, it was strained. But I would say that it was a good relationship before, a good relationship after, and in between, it was just filled with a lot of lies, pushing people to the edge, my mom included, of can I trust this guy anymore? So, I don't have too dramatic of a story on that end. I think that for a good thing, I don't have too traumatic of a story. My mom basically stuck by my side throughout the entire situation. It's just the levels of trust and the levels of financial trust have been repaired in the time following the last bet. Whereas for years, those were strained.
Love it. Love for all the mums out there. And there's nothing wrong with being shouted at at 24 years old by your mum controlling your money. As a 38-year-old who gets regularly shouted at by his wife who controls his money, telling you there's nothing wrong with that at all. Rob, amazing. I've really enjoyed this interview. I just want to finish with one last question. What's it been like since starting up your channel? I know you've been doing this for a couple of years now. What's it been like sharing your story, but then getting the feedback from the people who are listening and hearing how your experiences, your stories that you're sharing, your lived experiences are helping them and when you hear those stories, the success stories from your viewers.
I would say that the way to describe the feeling is like long periods of loneliness paired with periods of massive positivity. And so what I mean by that is like when you start creating content, you're taking a risk, you're putting yourself out there. I basically came out and said, "Hey, world, I'm addicted to gambling." And in the beginning, there was viewership, but it felt like I was still kind of alone and I was still kind of the only person that had this problem. Little by little, people started to comment, to send direct messages and saying things like, "Hey, I relate to what you just said. Hey, I'm going through this myself." And now, you know, over the course of the 2.5 years, there were plenty of times where I felt like pointless in making the content. Like I was just doing it out of routine. I was just doing it hoping that it would work, that it felt like no one was watching. The goalpost kept moving because people were watching by the middle. It just felt like, oh, well, we're not getting growth anymore, which means people don't care about the message. But, more recently, I've started to kind of slow myself down. And if I think just like objectively, the amount of messages that I've gotten to the extent of something like, what can I do to get better? Is massive. Under that's like, "Hey, I wanted to kill myself for a really long time until I started doing some of the things that you did, and now I feel better." Then under that, it's like, "Man, you saved my life directly." Like, and feeling things like that, it's not what I think about a lot, but it's like, what's the right way of saying it? It's very meaningful, and it's something that's helped to sustain my recovery. Now, actively, when I put out content, I get positive and negative feedback, and we're always as humans drawn to the negatives. And so I have to center myself and try to remember those positive things that have come along, the people that have actually gotten help from what I do. Because oftentimes I'll find myself stressing about views the way that I used to stress about scores. I find myself stressing about progress the way that I used to stress about money. And so it feels almost like, I'm redeveloping a compulsion for things, but in a way that's not necessarily gonna ruin my life. There's just still a lot of things to work through in my mind that take away from the true beauty of the situation, and the true beauty is that when you go and you share your story online, whether it's 1 person, 1,000 people, or 1,000,000 people that watch it, you can impact someone's life in a positive way. And, not to selfishly say you could save someone's life, but it's true. I mean, think about the times that you were at your absolute lowest. If you had saw someone online telling you that they'd gone through the exact same thing, that could really change your perspective on where you're at. And that's a hope that I have from doing episodes like this with you, Daniel. I hope that people watch this and can say, hey, I get it. I went through that same thing just a couple days ago. What can I do to get help? And we've kind of laid out some steps here today of what people can do. So it's give and take, but it provides meaning. And if I'm able to focus up in the right way, it provides purpose. So it's given me a tool that has saved my life.
Reminder for anyone out there struggling, you are not alone. We've been there, we've experienced it, and we've come to the other side. You can too. Rob, amazing, amazing positive thing to finish on. I just want to thank you so much for again taking the time to do this interview, and thanks again.
Of course, thanks for having me.
Guys, if you not only want to stop gambling, but you want to stay stopped for good, click and watch this video on the screen here. It's my top 5 mistakes that I kept going through 20 years of addiction that kept me going.